who's a political scientist with work across disciplines. She has taught gender studies, sociology, political science and philosophy at Lady Shri Ram College, Ambedkar University, Delhi, TIS Mumbai and DEI Agra. She writes in English and Hindi. Published books are Home Truth, Stories of Single Mothers, Biographies of Peace Activist Irom Sharmila and Nautanki actor Gulab Bai, and the book Her Stories, Thinkers, Workers, Rebels, Queens. Her latest work is a study of feminist street theatre. Her Hindi writing includes Bharatiya Mahila Andolan, Kal Aaj aur Kal. She is an awardee of research fellowships from the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, MacArthur Foundation, Indian Council of Philosophical Research, and Indian Foundation for the Arts. Dr. Mehrotra has designed curriculum for academic courses in NIOS, IGNOU, NCERT, Azim Premji University, AUD, DEI. She has designed and conducted research with UNICEF, Aga Khan Foundation, ActionAid, and other non-profits on issues of gender, sexuality, adolescent and child rights. Currently, she teaches a paper, Philosophical Perspectives on Education, at IAAT, a teacher preparation course in Gurugram, and continues to engage actively with women's and human rights movements. So thank you, Dr. Deepti Priya Mehrotra, for coming here and taking us through your vivid pictorial as well as textual analysis.
Thank you both of you for inviting me here. I'm sorry, I'm doing it on first name basis, Anuja and Nupurnima. Thank you for inviting me here, and for all of you for being here. I'll take you through an introduction to the theme, and then we'll take you in through specific plays and specific issues with images. So an introduction with this image is the cover of the book that I've just brought out. It came out middle of last year. It's called Walking Out, Speaking Up, Feminist Street Theatre in India. Much of what I'm presenting is actually there in the book and is much more in the book. So that's I will come to what the cover image is and a lot of other surprising facts. What the theme of the book is a street theatre that was aligned to the women's movement of the 80s and 90s particularly. So this is a retrieval of histories of women's movement, histories of theatre, histories of resistance, and this is how the audience would fill up when we did plays also. So I'm not, put off. I'm very happy when more people keep joining. So the times, as I said, we are going back to the first plays are 1979. So there were two plays that we know of. They're the earliest feminist plays that we know of in the country. Both were made in Delhi in 1979. I will come to the specifics in a while. But so from 1979 onwards, through the 80s, across the country, not just Delhi, but also Maharashtra, not just Bombay, but also Madhya Pradesh, which included Chhattisgarh at the time, UP, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Kerala. We had plays written by, conceived, produced, created by women and performed by women. So this was part of what we call the autonomous women's movement by and large. So not aligned to any parties, much of it, and most of it really born out of anger, born out of pain, because the issues were just so deep-seated and so chronic and so acute that there had to be a kind of a bursting. And when it happened in one place, it was like a ripple effect that never stopped actually. So those were the heydays of the women's movement, the 80s and 90s. And Delhi University was very much part of it. And participants in these plays were from across class. There were university teachers and students, and there were also others from the city, from urban areas, but also from rural areas, also from working class areas. If you look at Delhi, we had many of our actors and plays being made in Jahangirpuri, Dakshinpuri, Nannagri, Nangloi. So you had that, which actually was one reason I had to write this, because they have never been written about. The other plays have been written about to some extent, and that the cover is also a play performed by working class women. I'll come to it. So the issues cut across class often. The issue of violence against women, violence in the family, was very much central to the beginning of the movement and to the early plays. So that, plus then everyday discrimination, everyday sexism, chronic kind of injustice. So this was also, then we had some very nuanced perspectives from the working class, which were plays which combined or which brought together issues of poverty and gender. So there were plays coming on health, the fact that the health sector is really non-functional especially for the disadvantaged parts of the country and city, and also just why poverty, what it does. So there was, for instance, a play called Rickshe Wale Ki Maut, which may not be about a woman only, but done by women. So there were, and then of course there was the whole issue of rising fundamentalism, bigotry, communalism, call you what you will, but prejudice being created between communities. Yeah, so this hit us when 1984, the riots, or what we often call pogrom or genocide of the Sikh community in Delhi and across much of North India. So the women's movement was very involved with particularly with the widowed women. So there were thousands of widowed women, because there were at least 3,000 men killed in the riots, and so these were of course spread out in Kalyanpuri, Trilokpuri, Nangloi, etc. But the work went on in these areas with children and women, and of course young people, what men were there, but it was there were so many widowed women, and many were resettled in Tilak Vihar. So a lot of work went on there for a few years with the women, and some plays came out of that experience as well. Why street theatre? Why did the women's movement take up street theatre as a form of communication, of media, of action, of resistance? The issues were being analyzed by women in, say, the university. There were if there are some names that you may be familiar with, Subhadra Butalia, Urvashi Butalia, who was mother and daughter. Subhadra was teaching in Dayal Singh College, so she was very involved. So it was Urvashi, so was Radha Kumar, so was Amrita Chachi. These are academics. They have much to their writing and teaching by now. But there was a small group called Stree Sangharsh in Delhi, which was analyzing patriarchy in India, what exactly is happening here, and were reading theory, reading liberal feminism, reading socialist feminism, identifying much more with socialist feminism. And a lot of those issues of violence against women, say the dowry and the dowry murders, were analyzed for almost the first time by this group, and they felt a need to reach out to wider society, because it's not only about analysis, it's about change, and it's about solidarity, more and more people being part of this movement. How else will there be real change? So street theatre was the means, really, it was the foremost means at that time to reach out. And that is the reason that not just dozens or scores, but hundreds of plays were created by the women's movement across the country, and scores of them in Delhi. So street theatre, of course, we know comes from the agit-prop theatre, which is agitation and propaganda theatre. So which comes from the communist movement in the early 20th century. And then there is a history which I won't go into, but there were some groups doing street theatre in Delhi from the early 1970s, Ahvan, Nishant. Jannatya Manch was doing plays from the early 70s, but not really street plays, but they were taking their plays to audiences, but they were doing it kind of on a stage. It was not the format of a street play. But they also began doing street plays at the same time, 78, 79, Jannatya Manch, and the women's group. So this theatre, when the women's theatre developed, the feminist theatre, it, I would call it a genre, or at least a sub-genre in itself, because it had a unique development. It was and a unique aesthetics and politics. So it, of course, was about agitation. It was about propaganda for a certain ideology and idea, but it was much more as well. So it was about, it was really very deeply going into women's experiences in women's own words. So women were speaking up. It was largely born out of collective workshops. So feminist workshops was almost the typical methodology through which the plays were created. That's why I don't say written first, because they were really created in the three dimension. They were created through women talking, sharing, and then also theatre exercises which loosen up the body as well. So then improvising, and then out of those improvisations, which may be from life, there's a theatre person also sitting there facilitating, and she weaves it together into a play. And then the same group usually performs. So it was very close to the heart of the people performing as well. They were saying what they really wanted to say, were often too frightened to say it in their individual lives, because it is a lot to do with the family, it is a lot to do with, parental prohibitions or maybe harassment on the streets, and you don't want to even say it in your family because then you may not be allowed to go out, or more fear in the home. So you understand that there's a lot of fear around women, because there are issues of safety and danger all the time that women face in the home and outside. So collectively, these issues were actually projected, and it was very powerful. It was very effective. You could see, okay, it was a different time. There was no social media, if you can imagine that. And there was Doordarshan, the television, I think only for 4 hours for the early part of that phase. So there was very little television. People had, a lot of the rural migrants or even urban were used to maybe seeing a Nautanki somewhere or seeing theatre on the, so which was very, very popular modes of theatre in our country. So so people actually, or even if they hadn't seen a play earlier, when you went to boat club or any park and you put your footwear in a circle and somebody in your group played the dholak or dhapli, the tambourine, and announced the play, people would just gather. Like if it's boat club, it's not what is Kartavya Path and all today. Boat club was free, and there's no surveillance that we knew of. We could just go there.
These people know where boat club is.
So boat club is where Kartavya Path. It's next to India Gate. It's it was. You'll see some photos. It was the center of the city, and there are government offices there. There's Krishi Bhavan. So people would be always loitering around or Mumpali kha rahe hain, whatever. So people would gather. You just go there and you'll see. And to say that there was an impact, you could. There was always, these plays were open-ended. They used familiar language. They used everyday idiom. They used relationships that we're all, emotive kind of relationships which come from our lives and touch other lives as well, because they belong there as well. So many people would say, "Aapne to hamari kahani dikha di." That was a typical line. You always heard it, "Hamari kahani dikha di." Whether you did it in a Lajpat Nagar lower middle class house. So the plays were performed on the street. The plays were performed in colleges. The plays were performed in homes, in the chat ya angan, because the street is really much more men's space. And so you wanted to show it also to women. So women's colleges, of course, but also Lajpat Nagar when groups went in the Angan. So दिन में the men were out working and there were women who came from the neighborhood and आंगन में बैठ के या छत पे नाटक किए जाते थे and you got the same response. आपने तो हमारी कहानी दिखा दी तुमने तो. You know, from older women, these are, you know, many are migrants, 47 migrants, but they had their stories and the pain and the, so. And what happened is that people's stories came tumbling out when you did the plays. The first, the anti-dowry play was one of the first, or the anti-sexual harassment play. People's stories came tumbling out and the groups couldn't manage what was needed because those cases kind of that came tumbling out needed action, needed support, needed legal support. And therefore groups like Saheli were set up actually as crisis centers. It was some of the women doing the plays who set up Saheli and who set up Karmika, a group that ran for many years, specifically taking up dowry cases till the early 20s, for about 25-30 years. Shakti Shalini, the shelter home, was set up out of this in 87. Jagori was set up. So it's the same kind of group of people that are still on the ground, many of them, doing feminist work. Just a sentence about the research process and why I did the book. You kind of got that this theme is important enough to merit a book, and I myself was doing these plays. I studied in Delhi University from 1979 onwards, and from 1979 onwards was doing plays and bumped a lot of classes to do my plays. And I mean, to the credit of my college, that's the thing I give them most credit for. They didn't pull me up for low attendance, and I was able to do well enough, but to do very well actually, because 1 month is all you need to study actually for BA. Okay, sorry, that's an aside, but because we are in the university. That is because I was so immersed in street theatre for 10 years and the women's movement for 10 to 15 years, the power of it has never left me. And it's the same for anybody I've interviewed from that time. You know, you go into such a time when what you were doing was so clearly so powerful and had an impact on society. Its impact that is very difficult to trace. As you know, much of sociological work is not traceable, not measurable. But you can see that it actually did influence media. There were, even the word rape was hardly used. Even the word child sexual abuse was a term nobody knew at that time. Gender was a word that was hardly there. So you can imagine there were, of course, no women development cells. There were no none of the committees on gender, etc. So no courses on gender. So it was a time when actually all this also was part of the development of discourse. And when I interviewed Uma Chakravarti, for instance, who taught history in the university and has seen many of the plays, been involved with one of them, she's very clear that even these plays encapsulated theory. You know, even one sentence sometimes encapsulated a whole theory. For instance, माँ दरवाजे पे खड़ी है एंड बेटी अभी तक नहीं आई, मेरी बेटी अभी तक नहीं आई. उसको मालूम है उसके पिताजी के आने का समय हो रहा है, पर देन द भाई इज सेइंग वो बहुत लेट होती है, बहुत लेट करनी. देन द यंग वुमन कम्स इन एंड ही सेज, द भाई सेज, इतनी देर क्यों कर दी? एंड शी सेज, भैया लाइब्रेरी में थी, कॉलेज में थी. एंड द मदर सेज, बेटी तुमको मालूम है तुम्हारी माँ फिक्र करती है. And then the brother goes out in a huff and the mother says कि तुम मेरा तो ख्याल करा करो. And she says, तुम पर भाई जो अभी चला गया है, आधी रात को आएगा, तुम उसको क्यों नहीं रोकती हो? और खतरा तो उसकी वजह से है. meaning, you understand, he and his friends and his kind of gangs, or that ilk, if you could say, just because of men who are on the streets, that women can't go out on the streets. किसका खतरा है? मतलब it's not भेड़िए का तो नहीं है खतरा, है ना? किसका खतरा है? So it's not that we're scared of the night. You're scared of men who may grab you or who may harass you or worse. So that sentence or that little dialogue, is actually you build theory from that in a way, So the plays actually did have influence on media, on academia, on law, because the laws on dowry, the laws on rape, it was the same people fighting those, and the laws did change at that time, and also policy. So I'm going to now switch into showing you and talking along with that. So, okay, I'm just going back a lot. अच्छा ये थोड़ा स्लो जा रहा है. Just bear with me, it will take a minute. I want to go to the first image. Yeah, we're nearly there. Yeah, that's the first. So this is Om Swaha, one of the plays made in 1979. This is in the boat club, and the woman in the center is Hardeep in the play. Hardeep was actually killed in Jangpura, and there's a whole story. I'm not going into that, but she was killed by her family. It was fairly clear. The police, as usual, were not investigating. The newspapers would just say every week you had something, almost every week one, that so-and-so woman has died burnt by kerosene stove by accident. So these were written off as accidents. And the women's movement, actually, women's groups which were already there, like Mahila Dakshata Samiti, actually took on the investigation here. And they came to Jangpura and they asked the neighbors. And coincidentally, Subhadra Bhutalia's house was just across Hardeep's house. And she had noticed Hardeep in the balcony looking quite sad with her little daughter and looking quite unhappy over time. She didn't know the family. But she had then seen this woman with almost flames coming out, but wrapped in a white sheet and being rushed in some vehicle to hospital. Hardeep died in the hospital. So this is what happened. And neighbors were actually bribed by the in-laws of Hardeep. Subhadra also, the father-in-law of the dead woman, came to even the Bhutalia's house and said, they had a shop, they had a television shop, and television was a big thing in that time. So कि आप हमारे दुकान में आके कोई भी पीस ले लीजिए. Yeah, so it was a form of bribing that was going on, and actually nobody spoke up. I suppose the bribing worked to some extent, and people are afraid that these are actually murderers, they murdered their daughter-in-law. So, hum chup rahenge, it's just apathetic in a way. Subhadra spoke up, so that became a whole case, and there was. So many details to that. But the play then, so this is Hardeep in the center, and around her are the in-laws and husband. And here they're taunting her and they're shouting at her, and there's been, of course, scene before that. And she's doing a lot of work in the house. She's been back to her parental house, and they've said, "Nahi beti, adjust karo." And she's come back, which was the typical kind of dynamics. And so they are taunting, shouting, berating, and it builds up to a pitch where they're screaming at her and shouting at her, and then it builds up to an even greater pitch where there are orange shawls or chunni. There are no props. It's what maybe two of these are wearing orange shawls or chunni. Unke saath ye, unko flames ka ek symbolic ho jata hai, and she's beaten to death actually. She's burnt to death, so to say. And she's there she is lying as a corpse in the middle of the city. And it has actually happened just 2 kilometers away in Jangpura. But so this is a way of making it a public issue. You know, what was totally privatized. This is actually not just questioning or challenging the privatization of the household. It's saying of relationships. It's actually shattering that divide because it's showing it out in the open. Saying it's creating a public. So this is the father-in-law saying, "Beta fikar nahi karo," because that's the husband of Hardeep. "Fikar nahi karo beta, तुम्हारी दूसरी शादी होगी और दूसरा दहेज आएगा," over the dead body. And that's what happens. The dead body is carried around. Ram Naam Satya hai, police sari vyast hai, something, and she's put away. And so we don't see this family anymore. The rest of the play is a second woman story. So the plays were actually created collectively out of real stories. So partly you could say they're documentation of contemporary reality, and partly they are fictionalized to make a play, to make it dramatic. And so this is the second woman in the play, second bride in the play, and she is called Kanchan in the play. Her story is made up of there were two real Kanchans, one Kanchan two Kanchans, one in Model Town, one in Malviya Nagar, and Tarvinder, who was also in Model Town. All these three women had also been killed in their homes. So this second woman is kind of her story. But so the early days when this play was done, Tarvinder was also killed. But I think from questioning in the first show was done in IP College, actually, the first show. And then it was done, I think, in other colleges. And then there would have been questions from the audience. There was always post-performance discussion that has to be part of the play. And I think out of that there was churning in the group. They changed the end. So the end, by the time the second group, so I was actually in the second group of doing this play, when they were looking for kind of catchment area was the university. No, we were very young and we were caught to do the play after. The older people had a lot of things to do in their lives, and it takes a lot of time to do a street play. So they, after maybe a few months or a year, were not able to carry on. Some of them carried on, but several young people from Hindu College, from St. Stephen's, from Hindu and Stephen's certainly, joined the play. And so the second woman, Kanchan, how the play was changed was to not kill her in the play, but to show her up to the point of severe abuse, and then she asks the audience, "Ab main kya karu?" Yeah, so actually you could see the audience. It was an audience more than 40 years ago. This was from 1980, this photograph. And the audience is people who are actually at that time thinking कि औरत को तो घर में ही रहना चाहिए, जब that अर्थी के साथ ही बाहर जाएगी and all this. And which is not gone away yet, that ideology, but it was very much the ideology at that time. घर में ही रहना चाहिए और she should definitely not leave her home. But when faced with the story and faced with the question, nobody in the audience could really say that she should stay right there. You really had a consensus almost, or you had a majority of people there who actually said that she should leave. Can she build her own life, whether she's educated or not? And people would say कि पढ़ाई भी ज़रूरी नहीं है. People earn, women earn, but she should at least have an option to survive. So leave if she has to leave. So that's where somewhere my title comes, walking out. Walking out, speaking up has kind of two connotations for me. Walking out is also the fact that the theatre itself was being done by women who were walking out to do the plays. It was not easy for those doing the plays. People faced at home कि ये क्या कर रहे हो सड़क पे जाके, we've gone to college. I mean, especially your decent middle class girls, we brought you up to be docile and, be good and study. And then, well, what are you doing out on the streets? So a lot of women were kept back for that. Rehearsals might be later in the evening. It was very difficult. So there was also just the fact of resisting whatever pressures and walking out every day and being in this very public space and together saying what we had to say. Yeah, so that walking out, that participation in street theatre for the women was very, very special in terms of the personal development of the human being and development of thought, of expanding the realm of possibility. So this and these actors, actually, the one standing at the back is Anuradha Kapoor, who also headed National School of Drama later. In the middle is Maya Rao, who you may know from the solo that she did after the Nirbhaya Kand, a solo called Walk, which is available on YouTube. And so she does brilliant solo to date, and she's performing all the time. So that's Maya in the middle. And Maya and Anuradha wrote up the play. A whole lot of women would gather over a few weeks to thrash out the script and characters, but these two wrote up the play. And so we had very evolved theatre persons, which also was very fortunate because the plays were spectacular. They were aesthetically fabulous. So this is the same play being, after the play, I'm not showing you the play pictures, but it's in Nangloy in front of the police thana, where there had been a killing in Nangloy. And this is women of Nangloy. One of the posters says, Jaswanti ke hatyaron ko giraftar karo, saza do. So these are very angry people. And this is a woman speaking up after seeing the play because it would evoke testimonies from people around कि हमारे घर में ये हुआ है और हमारे like that या बगल. So this is the same play being done in a middle class. This is South Delhi Masjid Moat DDA flats. This is also a post-performance discussion. Along with this, there was a signature campaign. Everybody signed them, and along with this, there was a bhuk hartal by parents of what they call martyred daughters. So parents of women who've been killed in families. So there was a whole, these plays were part of campaigns. They were part of movements. Okay, I'm switching to the other play called Ehsaas, which is the other play made in 1979, made in Miranda House, in the room of one of the teachers there, Ruth Vanita, and who taught literature there, who's a brilliant writer and so on, literature. So Ruth's room, Ruth and Madhukeshwar had created a journal called Manushi, which was a very important journal at the time, and which brought news from across the country. And okay, so in that room there was, they put out little notices in colleges around saying that we're doing a theatre workshop. And people joined. One person came from IIT Delhi, she was part of it, and some from Miranda House, a couple of teachers. There was one from St. Stephen's, there were some from outside the university as well. And through talking out, and Tripurari Sharma was the theatre person there who wrote it up then. But a lot of talking and sharing, and this is a street harassment scene, as you can see, which is very powerful. And wherever you did it in colleges, you had so many stories again coming, out of the woodwork. This is an illustration of one of the scene, the beginning scene of the play, which is a teacher. It's about gender socialization. We didn't have that term then, but that's what it's about. It's about चलो लड़कियों बड़े होकर, इससे पहले she said कि लड़कों जाओ क्रिकेट खेलने, लड़कियां अपना सिलाई का काम निकालो और लड़कियां बड़ी होकर क्या बनना चाहती हो. And then she says नहीं पायलट नहीं, इंजीनियर नहीं, मेरे साथ बोलो हंसती गाती बेटी, हंसती गाती बहन, हंसती गाती माँ. So this is what you should aim towards. और इसके लिए जो पाठ सिखाया था याद है? हाँ मैडम, नीचे ही बैठो, नीचे हो तुम, पीछे ही रहना, लाइक दैट. आदमी से आगे जाना नहीं, आगे गई तो खो जाएगी. Okay, so this is a kind of a continuum, because we are in Delhi University, I thought I must show this. This is a demo outside St. Stephen's, and it has women from across the university. They came even from Jesus and Mary College and from that far, because it's against sexual harassment within the college. So it's against sexism within that college. So you can see the gates. I've seen the gates and the walls coming up through the university, through these years, through these decades. There weren't so many gates and there weren't so many walls. So you sometimes wonder, is it for us? Is it to keep us out? Yeah. So these were, a lot of them were students of St. Stephen's. They were Indraprastha College students. The details are there, but there's not enough time to go into, because I definitely want to show you the Basti, the working class women's plays. This is a play called Parivar Ki Gadi, being done in Nandagri, and domestic violence. This is Rama and Runu. Runu became a very, very excellent theatre person who actually took theatre. She was a resource person took theatre even to Bangladesh and Pakistan and Nepal for years. You can see what the audience is like. There were always multiple children and women and men. And the play was on domestic violence. Everybody had spoken about violence. Everybody had experienced some violence. And this is post-performance, the discussion. So, so this is this connects to the cover. This is a play called Zimmedar Kaun. It is being done in front of the Red Fort. लाल किला ग्राउंड्स में ये नाटक हो रहा था 1991 8 March. So it was a Women's Day being done on Women's Day. There was a gathering of many hundred people around. The actors are from, this is behind is Vidya Thapa, in front is Devi Kripa. They were part of Sabla Sangh and also part of Action India. So Sabla Sangh is envisaged as a union of working women, and Action India, an NGO that they were working in. So the play was called Zimmedar Kaun. The full title was Dango ke liye Zimmedar Kaun. So this was born out of experiences of working with widowed women after 84, and it was done for years. So we are seeing it being done in 91 in this picture, and it was the build up to the Muslim-Hindu kind of divide being created, the communal prejudice and communal conflicts being manufactured. So this was, the women's movement was so strongly opposing that. Yeah. So we had the same play, Lal Killa pe. And same occasion, this is Shahjahan Begum from Nangloy. Her own daughter had been killed in 1978 in the in-laws' house, and her daughter was called Noor Jahan, was killed at the age of 20 or so. And Shahjahan had she'd been a homemaker, and more than that, a factory worker who was running her household with 7 children. She stopped working in the factory. I think her son was old enough to start working, husband did no work, and she actually became a full-fledged activist after her daughter's death. She had never seen an NGO or activism before that, but when her daughter was killed, the Maika and Sasural were close by in Nangloy. Somebody ran to call her, and the girl was still alive, but nearly gone, and she died within moments. And the Khala Masi put a blanket around her, but she died right there. Lash padi hui thi, and she said, "Main to ekdam pagal ho gayi." And can you imagine? And the police wouldn't come. Her 11-year-old son went to the thana. The police wouldn't come. So then she actually got people to take the lash and put it outside the police thana. This was born, as I said, out of anger and pain. And that was the first dharna that she ever did. She did many more later in life because she joined the women's movement, as such. But this is the ground on which the women's movement in our country stands, actually. Its feminism really stands on this ground. And Shahjahan after in 87, she was requested by others in the movement to join Shakti Shalini, the shelter home that the women's movement started. and she ran it up for some 25 years, along with Satyarani Chadha, whose daughter had also been killed. So these two stalwarts ran that brilliantly for 25 years. She's now no more with us, she's passed away. But this is something she's also left behind. In Nangloy, apni gali mein, she started some education classes, and because the kids were being withdrawn after class 5, the girls, they were being withdrawn because the school was actually a little distant and there was a lot of sexual harassment as the girls got older, and it fitted into a certain कि घर पे रह के फिर इनकी शादी करेंगे and घर का काम सीखें. But when the classes were started in Shahjahan Appa's home, girls joined and they started learning. They actually finally passed out, class 12 किया उसके, so it became an NGO. It became Navsrishti. It's an NGO which is very, very much on the ground today, working in 7 parts of the city. It's touched the lives of maybe lakhs of people. So so this is 2002, when some of the girls who've actually either in class 12 or they're already doing beyond class 12, some have joined Navsrishti as on the staff to teach younger girls. They're also made a play group and they were also doing street theatre. So this is a play they're doing in Holambi Kalan. The play is called Main Anpad Kyun. So that was the issue. Okay, I'm switching because time is always an issue when I do this, but I'll try to do this very quickly. This is Maharashtra. The play is actually called Mulgi Zali Ho. In Hindi, it's called Beti Aayi Hai, because it was translated by just people at random into 8 languages, done in 8 languages. It was the most successful women's movement play, and perhaps in theatre history, you could say it's one of the longest running plays. It's still being done. And it's part of curricula in Maharashtra. It's been performed in 8 languages, as I said. It's been performed on radio multiple times, on Doordarshan in Hindi and Marathi many times. So it's a play that went from Savitribai Phule and reformers, because Maharashtra had those and they were already aware of the importance, and so they were aware of class and gender, and it began with that, but it went through the gamut of issues of domestic violence and also then resistance, and also issues which were about daycare, that there needs to be daycare across the country for all, universal daycare, so that women can work without, and earn. And I mean, they're already working in the household, but they can work and earn. And also that there needs to be jobs for everybody, and there needs and proper payment for jobs. So this play was performed, as I said, multiple. This was written by one person, and she's in the front. She's the one in the darker sari, in the sari in the front. Her name is Jyoti Mapsekar, and she's very involved in music, in singing, and she wrote the play. She wrote several other plays, and the group that she was part of is called Stree Mukti Sangatana, and it's still doing a lot of work on the ground. So this is a play called Teen Behnon Ki Atmahatya, done in Kanpur. Kanpur में 3 बहनों ने jointly suicide किया था. All 3 had hung themselves in the same room at the same time. When Mahila Manch and Sakhi Kendra, the women's groups in Kanpur, when Mahila Manch and Sakhi Kendra investigated, they found that it's a very ordinary family. It's not like devils who are the parents, but in fact it's a clerk, that's the father, and an honest kind of a person. So he's not got huge amounts of money, but he has 5 daughters and 1 son. He and his wife. Wife is a homemaker. Now this is the eldest 3 daughters who decided to commit suicide. And they had all studied. They had done college. One was in school, class 12. The other 2 had done college. One was in college. The eldest was looking for a job, and she wasn't being able to find a job. And there were also boys' families coming for marriage, and the demand for dowry was always more than the parents could afford. So she was neither getting married nor finding a job. And I think these three must have been very close to each other, and they decided that let's just exit this world. There's no place for us here, and we'll make life easier for the rest of the family. Our two sisters will have a life, you know. Five of us, impossible. So they actually hung themselves when the parents went for a family marriage in Lucknow. These three said, "हम पढ़ाई के लिए यहाँ पे रहेंगे," and this is what they did. So the play Teen Behno Ki Atmahatya was made by the women's group, sitting together and talking about this and coming up with their own feelings and stories, and wherever it was done, it was it drew a lot of response that लड़कियों को आज़ादी से पालना चाहिए, लड़कियों को, and there should be jobs for women. In fact, the father said to her, the father of these girls said कि मैम आप रिक्वेस्ट करिए to the महिला मंच people, आप सरकार से कहिए कि women के लिए जॉब कोटाज हों. women को जॉब्स नहीं मिलते अगर हम वहाँ भी रिश्वत चाहिए. Yeah, so this is the same groups. That was the first play that Mahila Manch and Sakhi Kendra did, the Teen Behno Ki Atmahatya, and this is a play they did in 1995. The Teen Behno Ki Atmahatya was in 1988, and in 1995 they were part of a whole series of cultural workshops. So this is a play Gumrah that they made. The same play. I wanted to just point out that Seema, there's a police person here, and there's Seema, the woman, and she actually wanted to act out her own story, and she did. So Seema is from rural Kanpur, and she had an alcoholic and abusive husband and family, had tried her level best, and then had actually left and gone back to her parental home, where she was welcomed and she was at least accepted. She made her life, and her life included very much being part of Mahila Manch Sakhi Kendra. She was an activist for the rest of her life. I'm not sure whether she's still there in the group, but she was very much, this was her life. So she was helping teen women, and she was very keen to show her story. So she enacted herself. So this is 1995, when a number of the activists took plays to the Beijing Women's Conference. This was 1995. There were women from more than 150 countries, I think 180 or 178 countries, who came to the Beijing Women's Conference, and that's when a lot of the global policy was laid, actually. And so I won't go into so this is in preparation for that. And you see these three plays were taken there. One was on the economy. It was the time when liberalization, globalization was so-called opening up the economy and hitting the poorest women very badly. So one was on the economy, one was on peace and conflict, because there were actually women from the northeast, from particularly Manipur, which was even then in conflict. And the Armed Forces Special Powers Act was enforced even then, 95. So there were peace and conflict. And the third play was on the women's movement in India. So it's a full circle in a way. And you see these chapas, these are because there were workshops done a year before the play in 6 parts of the country, regions of the country, drawing in women's groups, maybe 40 or 50 women's groups. Not everybody could go, but all of them had their handprint. So this is paint chapa, which was also taken to Beijing. So this is some of the women. They're sitting on the ground. You can see Ramani Devi with that. She's from Manipur, and Tripurari in front, the director, and so on. So this is to wind up to say that lately, along with the researching for the book, which involved, as you can imagine, oral history, it involved collecting scripts, it involved collecting these images, it involved auto-ethnography, because I was part of the play, so just remembering memory. And I had also thought that we would try and do a play, gather people, and it wasn't possible. but we did make a program of readings. So we took up 3 of the older plays, and we made a program which is flexible. It can be either only Ehsas or only Om Swaha, or also Aurat or Dharam. That was a play made by the movement, and we do portions of these. They knit together, and we also sing. And so we did these in about 12 places in Delhi in 2016 to 2020. The last one was in the the Indian Association of Women's Studies had its conference in Delhi, in Dwarka, in the Law Institute, and in the cultural evening we also performed this. So we call it a performance because the India Foundation for Arts actually looked at it and said we were very nervous, but they said no, it is powerful, even the reading. And we were all old actors, so it did evoke a lot of response. This is me, but with Shanti actually. Shanti is one of the best actors, best activists in the country, in the world, She sings brilliantly and acts brilliantly, thinks very strongly. So gender and class and caste, she is one of your leading thinkers actually. And these performances were also done in Studio Safdar. This is a performance there. And I'm going to wind up with this. If we had time, I have video clippings, 5-minute clippings, but let's, I think, do question answers, and if there's time, we could see a video clip.
Can you do the video clip that I
Okay.
Maybe we'll have questions collectively later on. We are more keen on the visuals.
I don't know why it went back, because the video clip should be after this. So I'm not sure why it went back on its own. It keeps going back, so yeah. Yeah, please. It's right after all the photos, but it apne aap keeps going back.
This one, Aurat or Dharm?
Yeah. Let's show the Ehsas one first.
Achha.
Yeah. That's in, yeah. So there are 2 options. There's Ehsas and there's Aurat or Dharm. Ehsas is this university mein bana tha, so I'm taking that as priority. But the other one is, we can see maybe 5 minutes of both if you. So these are not the plays as they were done then. These are the play reading performances that we did now. Because we were, there was no mobile at that time. There was.
सड़कें आदमियों की जगह हैं। ये यहाँ पर तुम नहीं घूम सकती हो।
लड़कियों को सूचित किया जाता है कि उन्हें 7 बजे रात से पहले अपने कमरे में पहुंच जाना चाहिए। जो लड़कियां ऐसा नहीं करेंगी, उन पर कोई भी आरोप लगाया जा सकता है।
अरे क्यों?
और रोज इन रास्तों से गुजरती हूँ, गेट, दीवारें, लड़का लड़की हाथ पकड़े हुए,
दूसरा वाला भी शुरू हो गया। दूसरा वाला भी
भैंस रोज देखती हूँ,
क्योंकि वो पीछे आ रहे हैं।
कहाँ जाओ? मेरे बच्चे को
ये दूसरा वाला है।
हाँ।
वो दोनों शुरू हो गए थे इकट्ठा। We'll just put one off.
ऐसा सी है ना?
हाँ, पर दूसरा वाला क्यों आ रहा था? उसको जाके you'll have to, I think, switch it off, like it must be
कर
on.
दिया।
हाँ, great. Why don't we just see that now? You've seen a glimpse of this. दूसरा वाला दिखा दीजिए। कोई भी दिखा दीजिए।
ये औरत और धर्म है?
हाँ। Okay, I'm very, apologetic about the time. It always. So we are looking at the other one first now, since you've seen a glimpse of this one. We called our play readings "Zindagi ke Natak, Natakon ki Zindagi." So this is the other one, Aurat और Dharm, which was really
अच्छा,
made.
आपको कुछ दिखाते हैं हम पे। मर्दों की जुबानी क्यों उस्ताद? मर्दों की जुबानी महिलाओं की कहानी से दिखाते हैं।
क्या बात कहिए।
रुकमा की कहानी मर्दों की जुबानी।
मेरे बच्चे को क्या हो गया पता नहीं, घबराहट से ना दूध पी रहा है ना पानी। पंडित जी आपके मैं हाथ जोड़ती हूँ, मेरे बच्चे को देख लो ना, क्या हुआ इसे, देखो ना पंडित जी।
हो, इसको तो किसी गंदी औरत ने छू लिया है, गंदी औरत इसको छू लिया है। अब बस भगवान का नाम लो, भगवान हे भगवान हे भगवान हे भगवान, तो शायद ठीक हो जाए। वैसे तो इसमें कोई चांस नहीं है।
मैं कहाँ जाऊँ, मेरे बच्चे को लेके कहाँ जाऊँ, कोई रास्ता तो बताओ मेरे को। अरे बच्चा आंखें तो खोल। ये मुल्ला जी जरा सुनो ना, मुल्ला जी मेरे बच्चे को देखो, मेरे बच्चे को क्या हुआ है।
हो, इसको मेरे यहाँ से ले जा। इस बच्चे को तो किसी महावारी हो रही कपड़े से कोई औरत, उसका साया पड़ गया है इस पर। अब इसका अल्लाह ही रखवाना है। हे अल्लाह, इसको मेरे सामने से ले जा।
अरे दोरानी सुन, अरे सुन ना, अरे मेरे पास आ, जल्दी आ।
जी मैं कैसे आऊँ? फिर अगर तुम्हारे बच्चे को कुछ हो गया खुदा न खास्ता, तो हमारे सास ससुर जो है वो मेरी खाल नोच डालेंगे, और तुम्हारे जो देवर है वो तो जिंदा नहीं छोड़ेंगे। मैं फिर जो महामारी से जो हूँ, मैं नहीं आ सकती दीदी।
अरे कैसी बात कर रही है रुकमा, ये समाज, ये देवर सब महामारी से तो जन्म लिया है, ऐसे तो पूरा समाज ही ना पाके। ये मर्द क्या जाने नए जीव को पैदा करते समय क्या क्या गुजरती है हम औरतों पर। तू आ रुकमा, तू जल्दी आ रही, जल्दी आ।
अच्छा दीदी, आ गई। जोर लगा, हाँ ऐसे जोर, ऐसे। अरे बिटिया हुई है, अरे सुनो बिटिया हुई है, कोई थाल तो बजाओ, बिटिया हुई है हमारे घर। अरे जी ये लोग कुछ है, ये कह रहे हैं कि बेटी के होने पर भी कोई थाल बजाता है।
इनसे बोल दे अभी तक ना बजे, वो बजा करेंगे। अब से बजा करेंगे। हम तो जान हथेली पर ले पैदा करें, और हम पैदा होने पर थाली ना बजे।
अरे उस्ताद, ये औरतें तो बहुत आगे निकलती जा रही हैं। अगर ये इसी तरह आगे बढ़ती गई तो कल ये पूरी समानता पे हटाएंगी।
अरे चौरे, हमारी मटर बस्ती का क्या होगा? अरे 2 घंटे हम ताश खेल लेंगे ना जुआ, सारा वो भी छूट जाएगा। और लुगाई के साथ काम करना पड़ेगा, बर्तन मांजना पड़ेगा। अरे मैं कहता हूँ जल्दी कुछ कर जमुरे।
ऐसा कुछ दिखाते हैं इन औरतों को जिससे कि इनको समझ में आ जाए, कि दिमाग में घुस जाए, इनके दिमाग में घुस जाए कि बिना मर्द के औरत की कोई भी औकात नहीं है, बिना मर्द के औरत की कोई कीमत नहीं है, कोई वैल्यू ही नहीं है।
सच तो यही है। इन्हें दिखाते एक विधवा की कहानी। अरे वही जो उम्रदार विधवा औरत है ना, उसकी यार। अरे चलो री चलो, सुना है तुम्हारे पास आई होगी नौता, मंगनी है फलाने की पोती की। हाँ चलो आगे तो ढोल तो बजाओ, चलो कुछ गाओ तो सही। लट्टे दी चादर कुत्ते सनेटी रघुमैया, आओ सामने उठने दुख गए रे मेरे चलते चलते। अरे मेरी पोती कहाँ है? आ अरे तो कितनी अच्छी लग रही है, कितनी सुंदर लग रही है। मेरी नजर ना लग जाए तेरे को। तेरे बाप से कहियो सारे जेवर ले डाले उसने। पर बेटा एक हाथ मेरी ओर से तुझे दे दी, ये बात तो जरूर तेरे बाप से बोल दियो।
अरे माँ, तू यहाँ क्या कर रही है? किसने इसको आने दिया यहाँ? क्या तू चाहती है तेरी वजह से तेरी पोती की एकदम मंगनी ही खराब हो जाए, पूरी जिंदगी खराब हो जाए? किसने आने दिया? जाओ माँ, तुम्हारे लिए वो कमरा है, तुम वहां जाके बैठो, शरबत भिजवा रहा हूँ तुम्हारे लिए, कोई जाओ साथ में बैठने को। किसी को अक्ल है यहाँ की नहीं है? सुहागने चाहिए यहाँ पे, 7 सुहागनों को बुला के लाओ।
अरे जमूरे कहाँ गया था 2 दिन से यार? कहाँ गया था मुझे ये बता। ये चली है ये औरत अकेली मुकाबला करने, देखो तो सही। अरे अभी हमने ताश के कुत्ते पूरे नहीं खोले, अभी तो औरतों को बांधने के लिए और हमारे पास है जमूरे, है ना? रीति रिवाजों से बांधेंगे। और आज तक हमारा देश धर्म की उससे आड़ से तो चलता आया, धर्म से तो चलता आया, तो ये औरतें क्या बेचेंगी हमारे सामने? एक हरजीत की कहानी, जिसका पति पिछले दंगों में मारा गया। हरजीत जिंदगी की लड़ाई लड़ रही है, वो खुद कमाकर हिम्मत से अपना पेट और अपनी बेटी का गुजारा कर रही है। वो कहा 10,000 रुपए जो सरकार से मिले, ला वो मुझे दे, मेरा बेटा था वो। पर बेटी, तू भी तो मेरी बेटी है, मैं तेरे को इतना समझाती हूँ बेटा, 10,000 में मुझे दे दे, और मेरे छोटे बेटे की चूड़ियां पहन ले, घर की इज्जत बेटे घर नहीं रह जाएगी ना।
माँ जी तुम कैसी बातें कर रही हो, एक के बाद एक। 16 साल के बच्चा मेरा देवर, मैं क्यों उसके साथ बैठूं, मैं क्यों किसी के साथ बैठूं, और एक बच्चे के साथ? आप लोग क्या मेरी जायदाद मेरे 10,000 के पीछे पड़े हैं? इतनी बेशर्मी। मैं अपनी जिंदगी खुद चला सकती हूँ, मैं कमा रही हूँ, ठीक है, पहले कभी नहीं रही, अकेले रह सकती हूँ, अपनी बेटी को मैं पाल सकती हूँ, मैं चैन से जीऊंगी, अपने पाँव पे खड़े होके जीऊंगी। बेटिया चलो, स्कूल का टाइम है, चलो।
धीरे धीरे आई हमें चेतना, हाजी धीरे धीरे आई हमें चेतना, अब रुकेंगे ना, अब रुकेंगे ना किसी भी हाल, आ गई चेतना, कौन साथी कौन दुश्मन है, हाजी कौन साथी कौन दुश्मन है, अब करेंगे हर की पहचान, आ गई चेतना। ओ पंडित ओ मुल्ला जी सुनो, जथेदारो नेताजी, अब गले की न अब गले की नया की चाल, आ गई चेतना, क्या हमारा फर्ज है और क्या हमारा धर्म है, इसका फैसला करेंगे नहीं आप, आ गई चेतना।
Okay, the rest is question answers. Yeah.
Thank you. We are open for questions, discussions, standpoints.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your presentation, and it rang very deeply with me because I too was part of a street theatre community called Khana Badosh, although it has dissolved now. And we tried going into places such as what is that place? The Red Light District,
GB Road.
GB Road, and in Dakshin Puri, and in other such slum areas. However, my experience has been very different from your experience, but I have read about it and I have read about street theatre, so it was beautiful to see all of that.
Oh, good.
I have a couple of questions and I'll keep it very short.
Yeah.
So, again, in my experience, and this is way back in 2017 and 18, when we used to do street theatre, and we would go out in places such as any random street, in any random market, we will start doing so, and we would say statements such as कि अरे मर्द ही तो है घर वाला, अरे मर्द ही तो लाएगा पैसा, महिला कहाँ से ले आएगी. When we would say such statements, we would something that I have experienced is that we did have a couple of people saying yes.
Yeah.
And saying yes, you are right, and we too tried to open the space for discussions, and there are men who would come out and say आपने ये जो बोला ना बिल्कुल सही बोला कि मर्द ही घर वाला होगा, वही सबसे ज़्यादा important होता है, and all of that. So I would like to ask if you had any such experiences such as this. And if you did, how did you handle it in the next couple of minutes when you had the discussion with the crowd? My second question would be, what happened to the kind of testimonies that were evoked out of the women from the crowd who would again there were events, there was some events where we did a play on dowry deaths, particularly through cylinder blasts, quote unquote. There were women who literally stood up and shouted, screamed. However, there was always there was a hesitation from our part as to what to do with that testimony. So I would like to ask you also, since you said that there were so many women who came up to you and asked that you spoke their language, you spoke their stories, what did you do with that anger, the emotions, the act of speaking out? What consequences did it have? And my third question would be, what do you think about today's street theatre societies that are there in every single college, who quote unquote select topics according to what will get them the best prize at fests? And that's it.
I mean, just to add on to the second question, especially with relation to you mentioned you've done a bit of auto-ethnography to make this book in its current form. How do you negotiate with narrative and performance, and then kind of curate them together to embed them? I mean, we're thinking from like a standpoint in sociology. We just had a critical theory session yesterday. I mean, how do we, again, I mean, from methodological standpoint, from theoretical framework, how do you kind of embed performance and narrative together and make them stand out?
Okay, shall I? It's actually a completely different question, so I'm writing it as 4 questions. All wonderful questions. Yeah, all one. Should I take these and then we can? So the first you asked about. You shared your experience of sometimes men in the crowd actually taking up the statements which were you were actually bringing them out to show how society should not be, and they took it as yes, but this is how it is and this is how it should be. I don't have a comparable experience. We did not find people exactly turning around and saying that. Nahi. I think, but I'll take you to plays that were done on rape at the same time, and there were 3 plays done on rape in 1980, or was it 80 I think, because there was the whole Mathura rape case that you know about. It was rape became a national issue, and the human rights movement and the women's movement, it was a central issue. There had been a rape of a woman called Mathura who was tribal, who was underage, and it was in a police station. It was a gang rape by police. It became a major issue. So there were 3 plays done by different groups in 1980, and I didn't see them, but I did read what Ruth Vanita wrote about in Manushi, critiquing those 3 plays. I probably saw one, but anyway, her critique was very strong. She said, if we're going to have these titillating men and reinforcing the helpless woman syndrome, then why are we doing this, or is it really helping? So it is that the fourth play that was done the next year was very thoughtful. It was actually done by then Theatre Union, which included Maya Rao, Anuradha Kapoor, Rati Bartholomew, etc. And they Vinod Dua. It was really thought out, and the experience of the previous year where others had done plays that titillated audience, that many male members. So they actually showed rape symbolically then. It was like a ghungru, there's the woman and there's a crowd, there's men standing around her, the actor men, and they're throwing a ghungru at each other. And it was very clear that this is what is happening, is rape. But it was totally not some. So I would say that there's something about the making of the play, the aesthetics and the politics are not so easy to always merge. The aesthetics or the strategies, the way the play is done, the dramaturgy is of equal importance. And perhaps that's why the old plays, because of this set of phenomenal theatre persons that were involved. I mean, it was also in Bengal, there was Madhushri Datta, in Gujarat there was Aditi Desai, there was Jyoti Mapsekar, in Maharashtra there was A. Mangai so in the south. So you had these extremely, not just capable but highly evolved, highly thinking, and they did such excellent theatre throughout their life. Anuradha Kapoor's theatre on gender has been on stage, has been really path-breaking. And so this is to say that I think it's because it was done so skillfully that I think we never faced that, and which maybe links up to this, that what the street theatre societies, and coming to your third question, the street theatre societies, I do not know much about them. You would know much more about them, so I won't say very much. But I do realize that there is a lot of competition and street theatre, and I think that's all right in its own way, so long as we don't say that this is part of a movement. It was a different time, there was a movement. The plays were embedded in the movement. They also helped the movement move ahead. They were very much, integral to the women's movement. There is no movement like that. So there is no movement like that anymore. I'm not saying there's no women's movement, but there is. But there is no movement which is at such a high, which has got so much energy, which has so much collective coming into it. There are 6,000 photos of the women's movement that I've been going through with the photographer Shiba Chachi. I should mention that many of the Delhi photos were by Shiba Chachi, who's an artist now. She took photographs at that time of the movement. We were going through, I'm helping her archive them, 6,000 photos from the 80s and 90s. And she started crying one day. She said, "Humko kya ho gaya hai? We did so many demonstrations. We were always doing things. We were doing, there was from Japan, Hibakushi had come. We were doing peace, and at every which level. That was when the first atomic or the second atomic nuclear reaction took place in Rajasthan. At the same time, anyhow, there's so many issues and so many movements, and the women's movement was so involved. There was the anti-communal campaign and groups called Samprita Virodhi Abhiyan, which Dilip Simeon, you may be familiar with the name, he taught in Ramjas College, was spearheading. This was so important campaign, a movement against communalism in the 90s, started from 85. The women's movement was always there. When I interviewed him, he said, when there was very little energy, the women's groups were always there saying, kuch karo, kuch karte raho, hum to karenge. So even the play on the cover, that Dango ke liye zimmedar kaun, it was the human rights and the anti-communal groups. Samritik Daikta Virodhi Abhiyan was very much part of organizing, but it was on Women's Day. So you had also the left women's groups there. So it was a different time, and you cannot expect everybody to be, doing movement kind of stuff, because you've also got so much surveillance, you've also got so much of police now. it was a turning point when a street theatre actor was killed, in 1990. Saftar Hashmi of Jannati Manch was killed. It was killed by goons that were part of the ownership of the factory that he was. But it's our plays were in the 80s, not under, there was no taboo on them. They were like, acha, we were doing them. But by the later 80s and then 90s, there was police permission to be taken. So things have changed so much. So if you do really stuff which is challenging the state, which is saying कि पुलिस वहाँ क्यों नहीं है, या आपने क्यों रेपिस्ट को रिहा कर दिया, आपने क्यों उमर खालिद को बंद रखा है, you can't say that. You'll be in jail. Yeah, we were saying everything, that needed to be said at that time. So that it's a different time. So I'm glad for some theatre and some street theatre, and of course for Khanab Dosh and all. Your second question about audience. You said audience would speak out, and what were the consequences or audience's responses, and so many issues coming out. What did you do? So I think the early plays, as I said, actually the same, some of those you saw in the photographs. I didn't name them for time reasons, but there's Gauri Chaudhary, there's who ran Action India until she passed away 2 years ago. So Action India is a 50-year-old NGO which has worked in the Bastis, which was also part of setting up Sabla Sanghs. And so Gauri was part of the play, so was Renu, so there were all these people, they were already doing Action India, and they have Mahila Panchayat set up, which is active to date, which takes up countless cases, and so it's like mediation, which is out of court mediation, and those which are not getting solved are taken to court. But a huge number get resolved through this community mediation. So that's that. But in the middle class and so on, it was really getting setting up Saheli, for instance. So there was Amrita Chachi, Gauri, they were all part of setting up of Saheli and running it. And it was, in the beginning, it was really meant to take up these cases. So Bhadra Putalia set up Karmika. So they took up countless cases, And in fact, some of the, Savita who's there came in because she had her own case, and then she's in Saheli to date. She came because she was her. So you have had cases being handled. I mean, cases is not the best word, but as a shorthand, you had these situations being handled. But I have to say that the issues go too deep into society. The issues are, patriarchy is so deeply seated, and that's one thing we've learned, how deeply entrenched patriarchy is, and how it's all also merges with capitalism and consumerism, and now the digital kind of media. So there's been also backlash to women coming out and speaking up. So there is a very dangerous kind of patriarchy and hyper-patriarchy and hyper-masculinity that's very rampant now, and it's global. So, when people say, but what was the impact? Abhi bhi ye sab hota hai. My only question really is that agar ye bhi nahi hota, to kitna kya halat hoti aaj, So, you realize that you're not the biggest force, but you're still a force. And it's still very powerful and important, and auto-ethnography and narrative and performance. So, Purnima, it was really the hardest thing to write this. I began the research in 11 years ago. And of course, I did many other things also. I wasn't continuously just working on this, but the writing up took about 5 years or 6 years, because my first draft, my editor said, so this is brought out by Zubaan, and Urvashi Butalia was the editor who would read it. She's over busy, and it's a feminist publishing house which is always in debt and always understaffed and always overworked. So she would take a year to read my draft, literally. And then the first draft, she said, but Deepti, there's too much of you. बहुत अच्छा है, बहुत कुछ, पर इसमें there's too much of you. So my second draft, which came after a year, I took 1 year to rewrite. I so appreciated her. I knew I needed a second eye. And so the second draft, she took a year to read it. And then she said, but where are you, and why is it completely academic now? So Then I had to do my third draft, which took a year. And she said, this is now balanced and this is wonderful and this is perfect, we're bringing it out. So that's, it's not easy to, so the toughest thing was the voice, I, we, they, them. Where do I, even now when I present, I do more of they and them than I and me, because actually that woman lying dead in boat club is me. You know, I was lying dead in boat club that the first. But it makes sense not to make it all around the writer or presenter. It makes sense because there are so many other people and there's the issues and there's everything there. So that yes, that's a hard one. And but it's a wonderful learning experience to do this kind of writing actually.
But I think we have several questions. Anyone else?
Like you were mentioning that this was the beginning of the development discourse in 1970s, the beginning of the discourse on women's movement and the development of the discourse. So the participants who were in the play, did they face any challenges from society, from the families? Just curious.
Yeah, such a good question, and I can go on and on because everybody faced problems and issues. Because, like, I can remember my parents who were teaching in the university, but being very worried. And my father one day saying to my mother that you've given her too much freedom. And many years later introducing me, she was a great feminist, and जब वो college में थी तब dowry burning. But it takes a long time, it is very frightening for parents to have their kids kind of daughters just going out and doing stuff. So, that was, so many people had to leave the theatre because of that. They had to leave doing plays. And there were so many issues that came up. So there were, of course, fathers, mothers, brothers, trying to keep them back. There was also other work keeping them back. But then, when you're a little older, and then there is other family responsibilities, and women, as you know, and we all know, are always multitasking. So how much can you do kind of thing comes up also. So in Maharashtra, the group Women's Center and Forum Against Oppression of Women, which are still there, which did some of the earliest plays on, again, these issues from 1981 onwards. They told me that they weren't able to do one of their plays, Hum Awaaz Uthayenge, which was women. It was around the UCC, the Civil Code, the discussions from a feminist perspective, not from today's kind of anti-Muslim perspective, but a feminist perspective, that there should be uniformity in personal laws. So that discussion was on since 1985 at least. And Hum Awaaz Uthayenge had women from different religious backgrounds talking about their own, not just talking, but those scenes from their homes, showing what is wrong in the law regarding for the Hindu women, for the Muslim women, for the Christian women, what is missing in terms of equality, women's equality and freedom. So that was a very powerful play, but they said they were hardly able to do it because शाम को ही मिलना होता था और शाम को ही करना होता था, and they just couldn't carry on. So Stree Mukti Sangatana, I think, being a very large women's organization with, a building and funding over time, and a lot of, they managed, but they set up a counseling cell because of the plays. When you said, when the cases came up and all, they set up a counseling cell because of that, part of their work. And they carried on over the years. But the actual actors kept changing. One or two may be able to carry on for years, but most kept changing. So just Om Swaha was done for about a decade in Delhi, from 1979 to about the late 80s. And there were maybe 8 different groups who did it in that time. Sometimes 2 groups doing it at the same time. And and of course more issues and more you can come up with because,
It's also like challenging the norms,
Yeah.
the norms of society. bringing
Yeah.
the private into the
Absolutely,
public.
absolutely. When the play that's on the cover, Dango ke liye zimmedar kaun, the women who were doing it were, when I interviewed Gyanvati and Vidya and Devi Kripa, they said that हमको तो घर वालों ने सबको मना कर दिया था कि नहीं जाओगे, because they were going into real khatra. They were going into those galiyan in Nandagri or Jangipuri where there had been mobs. Because the mobs were not all outside mobs. This is 84, and so they were doing it 85 onwards, and but they were going into those galiyan कि नहीं बदलना है तो वहाँ भी कर जाना है, and sometimes they had to just leave in between and just leave. So they said they had a strategy for that. They would just, when it became too threatening, and they knew that they will do this, they would just pick up everything and walk out quietly if it's too threatening. Yeah, but otherwise they would. Oh yes, Maya Rao said that in one of the colleges, she couldn't remember whether it was a mixed college, whether it was Venkateshwar or whether it was Deshbandhu. She couldn't remember which, but she said that was the only person who said there was some threat in doing Om Swaha. The boys just closed in, very threatening. They looked very angry and they closed in. And she said, as soon as we finished it, we just went over. We didn't do a discussion. So there were from the audience, Khatra, and home, of course, yeah. So Gyanvati, to wind up, when she said कि मेरे पति ने अखबार में देखा, somehow maybe that Dango wala, maybe after that Red Fort show, there was an item in the paper, and her husband told Jahangirpuri ki hai, her husband said कि ये तुम हो क्या? There was a photograph. तुम कर रही हो क्या? So she said हाँ. But he's to date a supporter, one of those who's changed over time. But her sas sasur, he had to keep it also from them. So, yeah. And to actually, just one more on that people, I think also the other side, what happened with actors, also learned so much, Some of us feel our real education was there actually. From doing the plays, from meeting society, from actually doing these cross-class plays. These were friendships we set up, which are very valuable to date, like Shanti and Gyanvati. But it's also that Vrinda Grover was one of those who was in our Ehsas for that 6 years when we were a young, footloose feminist, group and students. And Vrinda's now doing, one of the leading human rights lawyers. So she would also say to you that yes, she learned a great deal about how to argue, how to put forward, how to be in and the rest are teachers or lawyers. So mostly, or activists, full activists.
Last three questions. Thank you so much for the presentation. I really liked how you highlighted how women's voices are sort of brought out through street performance. So I don't have a question, but I just had a thought going on in my head.
Yeah.
So your presentation really got me thinking about Rancière's idea of distribution of the sensible, where it's talking about how politics happens when those who are not political subjects are actually sort of being seen and heard. So since my own work is somewhat aligned to performance, so it really made me think how performance could create what Rancière has called the census, where which essentially reconfigures what even counts as political speech and what doesn't.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, you're going into some theory which I'm not going to try and address at that level because you're reading it and you're writing it and you're doing it all the time. I'm not. So I'm not going to really be able to answer exactly. But the gist of what I think you're suggesting that women or people who are not political subjects can also actually put across something and actually create something which is extremely political and which creates, many of the people doing it now, it's a borderline whether to even say that they were activists or they weren't, because they were actually compelled by the situation, by just compelled from without and within, to do that. And it was very political. It was, but in fact, they were becoming political subjects themselves in the doing of it, and definitely creating an epistemic kind of, creating even the words epistemic justice. There was no understanding of that apart from this is something that we as very ordinary women, because we would always say, we were very ordinary women, we were not actors, we were just, nor were we, I think activist also requires you to be an activist out there, we were students, so it became like Jyotika said, one of those in this play who now teaches film studies in the US, and she's very well known as a scholar of film studies, Jyotika Virdi. She was in the plays and my best friend, but she kind of traces this out as so many ways to look at these, so many perspectives through which so we were creating a perspective actually. This was a women's and a feminist perspective. Sometimes you don't even say feminist, you say women's perspective. The women in Chhattisgarh who are doing it, they were part mostly of Chhattisgarh Mahila Jagriti Sangatana, but they hadn't read any theory. They were not university women. They were, because there had been murders going on next to them, and they were acting and they were making a play, they did the play. So yes, I think, I'm very excited about you following this up, and I'd love to know how and where you write it up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's really a pertinent issue which has been highlighted by you and experiences of yours. And I want to ask, how bringing up here Richard Sennett's The Fall of Public Man and transformation of theatre, which earlier used to depict something which were considered to be that time's public issues, and then your experiences pushing into something which were of intimate relationships, and they become part of that public sphere. So this transformation, and at the same time you have traced this journey of where streets and various other market spaces, they are not equally accessed by women. So how do you see this transformation of streets and market spaces, both in terms of longitudinal, decadal changes, and also geographically and regional, in Delhi, experience would have been, Delhi streets would have been different. In village streets or these localities would have been full of women coming up as a group. So their theoretical perspective may not be there, but in Delhi, some understanding, some sensibilities regarding this will be there.
Yeah. That's a huge question in itself, and I'll say a few things. One is that the streets have changed so much for other reasons as well, that we have to factor that in when we say the amount of traffic you have now was not there. The amount of so when we say it's kind of a reimagination of the streets when we look at the fact that theatre was done in public, it was done on the streets, it was women's experiences, it was very intimate experiences brought out in public. It was done, as I said, in boat club, in marketplaces, outside police thanas. The response was across women, men. There was a response which was positive really, which connected really, and not 100%, they would be apathetic or nay, we don't want to listen to this, people who just walk off, I'm sure. But we were also not doing questionnaires and audience feedback, so this is really anecdotal, our understanding of the public. But you had the similar issues in other homes. If you had the communal issue, it's around us, it's around with everybody. The issues connected, and the fact that women are saying this, it's almost like the play is like a Trojan horse. We're taking in our issues, which are very strongly anti-patriarchy, which are very strongly contesting the way things are, which are saying just, this great Indian family is a myth, and let's break it, let's look at it from the point of view of those who are suffering it. and you don't even acknowledge the work we do. And so we're going in quietly with the music and the song, and people are coming and standing around in the street, and then you're saying all this and you're breaking open that whole myth, and it I think sometimes there would be discomfort, like I said about those rape plays, that there was extreme discomfort. They were discontinued, but the plays that got across, the final rape play, which was done a lot. See, rape happens at home, it happens in the police thana. So the issue is rape, but it's an issue that is contesting the way things are in the family, the status quo in family, in society, in the state. So it's and there was the whole movement around that. So how does the street really, I think, if you really frankly, I think everything is moving backwards at a very fast rate. Yeah. So we are degenerating as a public, as a university space. Things are, because of the 10 years a big reason is the 10 years of a certain kind of ideology ruling. And it is a very anti-woman ideology. It is very anti all the issues that we were bringing out and all the ways, our perspective. So it's against the grain, and it was against the grain, it's even more. In Bundelkhand today, there's a group called Vanangana, and there are others around the country, which is doing street theatre with the purpose that it began with. So this is a rural group. Vanangana is an organization that's been there for several decades, and so has their street theatre group. It was born because of the need to have people speak out about issues, similar issues, harassment, murder in families. And they are also themselves, they have been through experiences of abuse and almost murdered, and they have joined Vanangana, many of the actors. And they do these plays and they take them back to the village where there's been a killing, and when they do it, there's a discussion, which earlier wasn't. There was no. So people give witness. You also asked about testimony. But what was really interesting is that people did start giving witness and actual testimony even in court. I remember doing Swaha in Patel Nagar, where in that square there had been a murder. Nobody spoke out. After the play was done, people gave testimony even in court. They spoke out. So that was some of the most. A lot of the plays were done where there had been a case, even out of Delhi and taking. So in Shahpur Jat, so that doesn't fully answer your question, but I think the reimagining of the street is something that we also need to, think about in many ways. But this is also part of the history of the street.
Complex.
Yeah.
We have the last question.
Hello ma'am, thank you so much for such an interesting and a very insightful talk, I must say.
Thank you.
Mine actually is not a question, but I was just wondering that when activism is combined with art or performance, then how do the women street theatre performers, they navigate their roles as artists and activists together, hand in hand? Is there a particular method? How do they do that?
Yeah, Gauri Chaudhary, who was one of the, best activists in the movement, she passed away 2 years ago. She was part of all this. And she was in Swaha for 10 years, and she was also on the ground every day. Middle class, but totally kind of, had pretty much given her every day to being in Jangpura or being in Jahangirpuri and working with people. So one of the statements she gave when I interviewed her, she said, हमारे महिला आंदोलन में there can never be anything without song and dance. Yeah. So this is something that she worked with women on the ground, much more with working class women, And in that area, it's actually true. The middle class, me or any of the middle class actors, were really learning. You can see how Shanti sings and I sing, yeah? So it's exactly actually how it is in Gyanvati, Veermati will all sing really well and loud. They are used to using their voices louder. They're used to it, it's a different culture, it's a different... So there are many women subcultures, and we drew from those. The dance that has also been part of, you go to Rajasthan and you do something through the day, but sham ko there'll be some naach gana. Very evolved, brilliant. So this is ordinary women, ghar mein sikha hai. It's not that they are this particular caste or they're Kalbelia or they're this. It's any woman of any caste, upper and middle and working caste. So it's cultures that we are losing, and it's a huge, it's really something to worry about. Why have we lost it and why are we losing it? But there were so many traditions of song, say in Kanpur, that play Gumrah actually had began with an alha, and that's the first place they know it, and it's so powerful. So they did. Tripurari, who directed that, also worked with the Nautanki and worked with the Khayal and worked with the Hyderabad folk theatre and made new scripts and feminist plays used with the old form, with the old actors, not trying to train new actors. Because what the old actors have is really, it's not easy to replicate, even if you've been to NSD or anywhere. Yeah, this is coming from culture, it's really coming from the ground up. And the feminist plays were extremely fortunate to have this mingling of different classes and castes of women. And much of the art really came from there. The art of theatre being done in the round. Street theatre is done in the round, the audience sits around, and it's the closest an audience can be to the actors. And the actors are never off stage. There's no green room, there's hardly any props. So that art and how to position people, how the voice is used, how that art we got from Tripurari, Maya Rao and Ain Lal, and from here we got the really robust song and dance, and also the different stories like Aurat and Dharam. A lot of it came from Mahabari. It's not as if it's not an issue with middle class women. But this particular, because it was made by the women from resettlement colonies, they brought in the idiom and the language. So it's actually from life, a lot of this. The mullah will say ki iska saya pad gaya. The pandit will say the same thing. And nobody will help out, and the baby will die. And then again ki jab bachchi paida hui hai, to thal nahi bachna chahiye, and all that. So these, the stories, the other play Ehsas, which it's actually in Delhi, and it had Delhi University scenes, and it had St. Stephen's College. When we are going to the principal in the play saying that ye कल होली है तो क्या कॉलेज बंद रहेगा, हम नहीं कॉलेज खुला रहेगा, आप लड़कियां नहीं आओ, लड़कियों का प्रॉब्लम है, कॉलेज खुला रहेगा. There was no women's hostel at that time. Till the 90s, St. Stephen's didn't have a women's hostel, and we're talking of 1979, when actually students of St. Stephen's made a whole signature campaign, the same student, and lots of women, 400 people signed, and it was torn in front of their eyes and thrown into the dustbin. So a lot of the issues came from different, from different places. But as Shanti said, I had a presentation in India International Center a few days ago. Shanti and Gyanvati were there, and Shanti, and they both spoke in the Q&A, and Shanti said that मतलब हमारी पुरानी यादें बटोर के लाई हो, मेरे को बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है. एंड शी सेड हमने बहुत आंदोलन लड़े हैं, और हमने अलग अलग वर्ग की इकट्ठा आके दोस्ती हुई, और हमने अपने दुख बांटे और हमने एक दूसरे के दुख देख के और समझ के और हमने इकट्ठा इतने आंदोलन लड़े हैं. एंड देन शी सेड हम बुढ़ियाँ हो गई हैं, अब आप लोग लड़ो. You know, I was so happy to see you young people, and you're fighting, and it's you know, yeah. But in Shanti, you've seen how she sings. So when we did it in Studio Saftar, Sudhanva Deshpande said, I wish I could say I had a voice like Shanti. So this is Sudhanva who's done theatre continuously, and I totally respect that they've done theatre continuously since the 70s. So.
Thank you, Dr. Mehrotra, for weaving together this.
Thank you, ma'am. Just a small not even a question. Actually, as you are the count of this studies, 1980s and late 1990s, actually, the intersectional feminists actually criticized the women movement and said that the middle class, the other women, they were presented as a Indian woman, and the marginalized women were actually thrown out of the but you are arguing that you were actually going in the working class areas, and it was more of a cross class, cross region theatre play. So I just want to clarify that in which level it was like cross class or cross region, like on the level of director, composer, and the performers who were there, what was the composition, and places you have already but even if we see that majority it was in university, the cyber university, and the Connaught place, Hojka, so these areas are quite elite in a sense.
Yeah.
And then the last, the content actually, the content of the theatre play. So when we talk about Sati, so how we see the origin of Sati, and then where should it be situated? Because Sati was also like it was also for some caste and all, and it was not in working class, working caste. So so did we see that cross class, cross caste, this kind of account in the content?
Yeah, very important. I'm glad you're asking this, because it is just so very important to nuance all this. And it is, there's some truth to the criticism. I also am critical of much of the women's movement being, I would say, taken over by middle class self-styled leaders, and funding comes from funding was important when the movement got institutionalized. I think part of the energy that you see in these in the 80s was that much of it was not institutionalized yet. It was really women coming with their emotion and with their experience. And that was there with middle class women, very honestly, and it was there with the working class women, very honestly. There were, so there are many parts to your question. One part is who made the plays. There were the plays that, and I really, this is so important to know and to say, that the plays like Dange ke liye zimmedar kaun, परिवार की गाड़ी, रिक्शे वाले की मौत, रक्कू की कहानी, so many, औरत और धर्म, these plays were conceived and made by the working class women who had initial training in theatre with, say, Tripurari and so on. But there was in 1983 a training in theatre in Mirzapur with Tripurari and Lakshmi Krishnamurti. They set up Alaripu, the theatre, and that training had people from many different groups across many cities, villages, and from Tilonia as well. They went back and did more and more plays. I mean, Tilonia had its own culture and theatre, that is Rajasthan, the SRWC in Telonia. But some of them also learned theatre there. And those are working class, they come from puppeteer families, they come from, who were leaving puppeteering and came back to it, and so on. Who also collected folk songs then, found a newfound pride in that. And also a way to carry it forward, because otherwise you lose that culture because there's no future to it. So there were, in Delhi, Dakshinpuri, Nandnagri, Simapuri, New Simapuri, these areas actually had the Sabla Sangh, which was, as I said, thought of as a working class women's union. And they were some of the best feminists in their thinking as well. The problem as I see it is we often don't see that these are thinkers. We see them as actors, we see them as singers, but we don't see that they're thinkers as well. And they actually were the ones to pick up the issues because they knew the issues inside out. By the 90s it was also Bhroon Hatya, the sex selective abortions. And today it is even digital that some people still are doing it. This digital abuse and so on. But at that point, it was because there's a strong movement. So Gyanvati, when I interview her, she was in the photos, but she in the Red Fort photo, etc. She was mobilized, or she was found or discovered by 2 or 3 middle class women, Gauri Chaudhary and Sharda Behen was also working class, but they were across class literally. And Gyanvati was discovered in her home in Jahangirpuri, her family had been thrown out from their, they were near here actually, in Kamla Nagar mein unka ghar tha, which was all broken up, and then people were taken onto trucks and thrown in 1976 into Jahangirpuri. So she has that whole experience. She was 18 years old. She already had one small child, and they didn't even have homes. Plot bhi nahi kate the us time. So they've been through all that. Now this is a woman who's mobilized by the middle class, one could say, by the movement or by a mixed movement. And she today says, I was thinking, can I ask her to come here? She would have come if I'd asked. She came to IIC and she stood up and sang a song, and she said that हमने नाटक ऐसे किए थे जब सेक्शन 144 था, तब हमने कनॉट प्लेस में किया था. So it's also that taking over what you're calling an elite space. It's everybody's space, Connaught Place or Boat Club, but it's why do we mark it out as an elite space? Those are some of the few public spaces now, or were, and to say that those were the maximum number of plays, because I'm naming a few. They don't even have the names. There are no scripts. वो लिखे ही नहीं गए. But जो issue उठता था, they became so Runo, Shanti's directed umpteen plays in the Bastis, and they have made plays on whatever issue there is and taken it out in their Bastis, which, as you know, are densely populated. So they've actually done the maximum number of plays, the maximum number of performances of plays. There are some photos of them being done in, I showed you one or two of them, Parivar Ki Gadi, being done in Nannagri. There are more pictures like that. So I think that is some of the most important kind of thing that happened in Feminist Street Theatre and the movement. It is less documented because less people had cameras and less of the middle class went in and took those photos. But whatever we have is evidence that it was there. Some of those people are still there. So now the criticism is still, I said the criticism is very true, and I would say the criticism is really from the late 80s onwards, when one saw the movement really becoming institutional, and one saw a lot of the deformities that come in with funding and institutionalization, including who takes over the leadership, who are the leaders, who has led this? Shahjahan Apa led. She made that dharna, that first dharna, but what would she actually But when it comes to gathering, to actually getting funds for something, she doesn't have the English. She doesn't have the cultural capital to actually negotiate with a funding agency. So funds became important to do the everyday activities, to pay the rent, to actually for some of the activists to survive. Although Saheli, for instance, refused to take funds from any place, but it had to be then middle class women. If you're refusing to take funds, you have to be middle class to keep your life going somehow. एक साल के लिए कर सकते हो, but you do some part-time earning, you do some consultancy. But Action India was paying the women. Simply they did it पूरे जज्बात के साथ, with full honesty. But that bit of payment would come from Oxfam or from some, so that they can survive and carry their life forward. So I think those issues were handled very well in the early years. And then when it was literally a movement and not institutions, and then it became silos, it became now. So Shiba says that when the photographer was part of the movement also, not just, she says कि जब, and part of Saheli, and so she says कि जब अब जागुरी का इतिहास लिखा गया, she was one of those who started Jaguri as a resource center. She said, these young people came and asked me, and they said, but what group was doing Om Swaha? And I kept saying, no, it wasn't Jaguri, there was no group. There was no it was women coming out and doing it because they felt strongly. You can say, अच्छा Om Swaha Natak group, ये भी नहीं कहते थे. So it was, it is very true that as the years went by the later 90s, there was a lot of takeover by middle and upper class, and I think the criticism coming from Dalit feminism is very, very important, and it's very valuable. It was needed. And Shanti, for instance, is very critical. She has a very strong gender and class critique. She was part of Action India, then Jaguri. She never went to school. She grew up पत्थर तोड़ते हुए राजस्थान में माँ के साथ खान मजदूर थी. And she however learned to read and write in the movement. She became convener of Jaguri at one point, simply because of the extreme intelligence and activism. But she moved out of it. She'll never step back into some of those spaces because, I'm sorry I named the group, but just forget that I named the group. But this is much more general, and it is not to criticize any one group, but it is a very general phenomenon that the woman from the disadvantaged class has less cultural capital, is less able to negotiate several of these terrains. And then there are some people who understand and who really see the solidarity of it, and some who, she says, कि जो younger people who came in, they just stopped showing me the proposals. A proposal should be written up in Hindi by the group, and then sent anywhere, which was done for a while, but then it was discontinued. So anyhow, so this kind of dynamic, this is just, she even said that हमको बंदरों की तरह नचवाते हैं. So, in a very angry moment. So I am very much respectful of that strong critique of class in the movement. But I think it's equally important to see that when there is a moment, and a long moment that I showed you, when there was a coming together which was honest and genuine, it's very important to remember those moments and to see that that is part of our history, because it should be part of our imaginary of the possibilities. Yeah. So that's why I wrote the book, because that did happen. Yeah.
No questions, because I'm so sorry, we had to leave for some meeting, and
Not
fortunately I could come back. Wonderful, and I'm sorry I missed some of the things, but I just one or two quick things, that can we say that this sort of thing was a one generation phenomenon, or did it really sort of, how did it kind of die out? seems that it's
You
no
ask
longer-
such wonderful questions. We are going to be here till midnight, I think. But was it a one generation phenomenon? Well, I mean, there were many generations in that. So there were, Shahjahan Appa is a generation older than us, and there was Gauri who was 84 when she passed away, and so on. So there were 2 or 3 generations actually who were who were involved between the 70s and 80s and 90s even. But I mean, we were like 18-year-olds, and they were 50-year-olds. So they were like, is that phenomenon, is it possible to repeat? The times are so different. The social forces, as you know, are so different. But, I think it's a politics of hope, and it may be a very foolish politics, but I think it's got its own wisdom, that there is a possibility to do something really meaningful and honest and authentic today too. And there can be, actually one of the things we're thinking of is now that the book is finally out after a decade of struggle, that we do a workshop in which we call the older jo hain abhi, and we call younger people who are interested, so that there is some passing of the torch in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Dr. Mehrotra. I mean, it was very interesting to look at these street plays not only as performances or spaces of contest and protest, but also as you mentioned how these performances started building upon consensus among people. Thank you so much.